Welcome back. We've got our continued coverage of the rates decision by the RBA. With me, Andrew Clennell, our political editor, Ross Greenwood, our business editor. Andrew, you touched on this just before the break. Jim Chalmers sent out a message. We'll take you live to his news conference in the next half an hour or so, but he says difficult news for homeowners already facing skyrocketing costs of living, including spiking energy prices. A better future awaits, he says, but first we have to navigate together this inflation challenge we inherited and the rising interest rates that accompany it. And as I said, he's holding a news conference shortly. But I tell you what, it's a baptism of fire in many respects. The energy prices now, 0.5% rate rise, is going to have to navigate, as Ross said, the first of many.
Yes, it doesn't get any better than the first 2 weeks, I suspect, for Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers, and they've had a little honeymoon, and this is about the start of the end of it. I mean, you got petrol prices going up, gas prices going up, energy prices going up, now grocery prices, now an interest rate rise to try and temper it, but real pressure to lift wages. You promised to lift wages. We've seen the New South Wales government move on that. They've lifted a wages cap they've had in place since 2011 today. We saw that story break today, and that's from 2.5% to 3%. So that's going to have an impact. I don't think anyone argues that more needs to be done about wages in Australia, but how do you do it without driving up inflation at the same time? And I think that message from Jim Chalmers is rather quaint. Don't worry, it is. You'll still get your better future that we promised. We'll just have to navigate through this first. Well, he hopes so, I suspect, Kieran.
Ross Greenwood, you've got that wages conundrum, and then let's just throw forward a couple of months to the budget. We don't have to wait till May. He's going to deliver one in October, and it's in an inflationary environment in which they've got to quite simply cool things down a bit.
And remember, there's a big issue here about cooling things down, because that's not what the government that we have now promised going into the election. It, in fact, promised to spend $45 billion more than the previous government over the next 4 years in areas such as childcare, in areas such as training, in areas such as the NDIS. And so Jim Chalmers, who has a budget, as you say, in October this year, now says there's also going to be cost of living relief measures inside that budget, which will cost even more money. But all of these things add to inflation. So at some point, somewhere, the government is going to have to start to cut. So that is up to Katie Gallagher and to Jim Chalmers to discover those areas where there is an ability to cut spending, government spending, if they're to take pressure. Because what you can't have is, on one hand, the Reserve Bank continuing to raise interest rates to rein in inflation, but a government that's spending adding to that same inflation. That's your fundamental problem you've got in front of that government right now.
Exactly, quite the dichotomy. And then yesterday, Andrew, interesting to hear Angus Taylor and Jane Hume, the new Liberal economic team, talking about needing to be frugal in spending and so on. It's quite the message, isn't it, really, after the last couple of years we've had. I'm not saying there shouldn't have been massive expenditure, but we've seen levels of spending through that pandemic like the likes of which you and I have never seen before, Andrew.
Well, there's no doubt that Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg over the last 2 years should have worked harder on budget repair. It was possible to do. And after that initial shock, which they had to fund through JobKeeper, and I again think JobKeeper should have been tested after 3 months instead of going the whole 6, and you could have saved $20 billion there. But the following budget, I remember asking Josh Frydenberg, where is, at that press club appearance of his in the Great Hall, where is the message here for the Conservative or the Liberal true believers in terms of at least some semblance of budget repair? But they were electioneering the whole time. So, yes, I think they do need to. I think it is a bit cheeky for Angus Taylor to be talking about this. I mean, it's the right thing to do. But seriously, after all that spending, are you going to say that? And I think the current government can blame the former government to some extent. But are they going to make the tough decisions? I doubt it. But this is the real test. Because you get a 3-year term. And really, if you're going to make hard decisions, it's been demonstrated you've got to make them in that first year. Now, Jim Chalmers and Katie Gallagher have said several times now they're going through line by line through that budget. So let's see what the line by line strategy gets us in terms of solid savings, because they won't want to attack areas like the NDIS, which they boast about as such a great Labor reform. They say they can do it just through rorts and waste in pork barrelling. You're going to need to go further afield than that, Kieran.